What is going on with y'all, man? It is Black Balloon, and I'm coming back with another video, so y'all already know what's going on. Alright, y'all. Now, today, this is a very interesting video, right? So I was just doing my usual, searching around, digging up some more stuff for us to talk about, right? And I came across this podcast I've never seen before, I swear. It's like, you don't even have to look for this stuff these days. It's right there. But anyways, the interviewer on this podcast, once again, I'll be sure to link it down in the description so you guys can check it out. Now, he was interviewing a guy by the name of Nathan Reynolds, right? Never heard of this guy, never seen him. But once we get to the clip, whether you want to believe him or not, man, this dude knows his stuff, right? Now, he claims to be a part of a bloodline directly related to the Nephilim. The podcast is about the bloodline of monsters. That's the title of it, right? And he talks about, different bloodlines being pure bred, basically pure-blooded families who are able to be possessed at a higher rate, more than half-breeds who are able to actually operate at their full extent when they allow themselves to be possessed by demonic spirits. He goes into skinwalkers. He talks about some very interesting stuff, y'all. I was actually fully tuned in watching the podcast episode. And of course, I clipped out some parts that, I really want y'all to see, right? So it's just, honestly, it's very entertaining to listen to. I know for a fact, a lot of it, is very true, because he also talks about little ones being exploited at a very young age, and he describes a song that was actually truly for little one's sacrifice. I'm not going to say what it is because I want to keep some mystery about what he's about to talk about, but you'll notice it when it gets to that part. But it's something I never thought about before, and then immediately when you hear it, you're going to be like, oh wow, it's like all of those songs that you heard as a kid, songs like Ring Around the Rosie, Pocket Full of Poke, blah, blah, blah. Like, they have deeper meanings to them. It's like one of those, right? And when I heard him talk about it, it kind of blew my mind. I was like, wow, yeah, that confirmed that we got to do a video on this, right? So the two clips, one of them is kind of long, so I'm not going to talk too much right here because I want to get into it. It's very interesting, y'all. So this is mostly about the bloodlines that, run this world, sacrifice, shape-shifting. He talks about it all, and it's very, very interesting. So y'all definitely pay attention to this one, all right? So with that being said, y'all, check this out.
Hopi Indian and a lot of people had gathered forever to commune with the fallen. They believed that the sons of the sky would come down every season at the winter solstice, and they would abide from the winter solstice to the summer solstice there. And so this was a place where they would give their daughters over to them. This is Hopi mythology, like 101, and they would make these kachina dolls, which were an effigy of the what I would say is a watcher angel that would come, and the daughter would be given to him, and she would place that over her bed throughout her life, and that's her familiar spirit, right? That's where I was born into. And the people that still practice that old religion, that's the way I refer to it, they still do this. And they still take their children up there to give them over to them on these high days. And so I was born into that, and I was born through that seed line and into that ritual magic world. And but my mother's side are extreme Catholics and Jesuits through and through. And so her father ran a different operation in Southern California, which was much more based on the child exploitation side of the equation. And he operated out of Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Lake Havasu, for those of you that are unfamiliar, sits in the absolute desert border of Arizona and California, and it has the Colorado River that's been dammed up, and they created an artificial lake there. And it was a secret military base back in World War II. It was called Site 6. And it was a stopover point crossing the desert for soldiers going there. And they would made it into a rest and recuperation area. And so it was a party city from its foundation. It had a lot of underground structures that were built into it as a refueling point. And in the 1960s, a guy named Robert P. McCulloch bought it. And he bought it, and he also purchased the London Bridge that crossed the River Thames. And he had it shipped over here stone by stone. And while they were doing that, they excavated 80 bodies that were entombed inside it in a practice that's called annulment, where you would sacrifice a person and bury them alive in the walls of the foundation. And so there's all these chambers in this facility of the London Bridge where they would do torture and all kinds of ritual stuff. But this is why the sing-song nursery rhyme, the London Bridge is falling down, falling down. That's a nursery rhyme to talk about how you have to give your children over to the government so you can hold up the London Bridge. And they would literally take their children. This is in the history book of the museum at Lake Havasu City. You can see these bodies of these children that were sacrificed inside the walls of that space. So he bought that as a charged object. He bought that as a portal mechanism. And they built in Lake Havasu City with another designer from the Disneyland. And they literally built a pleasure island.
Whoa, I had to come in really quick. I'm going to make this quick. Like I said, the clip is kind of long, so I want to break this up. I feel like this was one of the most important parts. He talked about the guy purchasing the London Bridge as a portal, using it as a portal, y'all, because of the darkness that had already took place at that site, the London Bridges. London Bridges falling down. So this is what I was just talking about, the nursery rhyme. Something, 15 years ago, we would have never thought about. We wouldn't think that this had some kind of meaning towards sacrifice and the little ones as like a punishment back in those times. Now, check this out. You already know I'm going to pull up the receipts for it, right? So it said one dark theory behind the bridge's longevity maintains that there were bodies encased in its moorings. The author of the book, The Traditional Games of England, Scotland, and Ireland, Elise Bertha, suggests that the origin of the London Bridge's falling down nursery rhyme refers to the use of medieval punishment known as immurement. He just said that word. Immurement is when a person is encased into a room with no openings or exits and left there to die. Immurement was a form of punishment as well as a form of sacrifice. It was a nod to this inhumane practice and the belief that sacrifices may have been little ones, y'all. According to her, people during those times believed that the bridge would collapse if there wasn't a body buried inside. But of course, they say that it hasn't been quite proven. Think about that. Says the people in that time believed the bridge would have collapsed if there wasn't a body buried inside. And they were actually using little ones to fill that space so the London Bridge doesn't fall down. If you think about how wicked some of this stuff goes back to, it's like everything involved the little ones being sacrificed. That's how you know the devil was there, taking that innocence at every possible chance he gets. No matter if it's the 1300s, the 1500s, the first century, the 20th century, it doesn't matter how long we go back. We always come across little ones being sacrificed.
That's what it was facilitated for. And they designed it so that it would be a retirement community that would facilitate the exploitation of children. And that's exclusively what that city was founded and built for. And so the original founders of that operated out of the Knights of Columbus predominantly as a wing of the Jesuits. And that's the business down there. It's an industry to cover up child abuse. You got a bunch of old men running around with little boys, and everybody thinks they're grandchildren and nephews and nieces and all that rest. And so all along that area down there is where I would be taken from my earliest days and shattered, abused, traumatized, systemically so. But it's for behavioral modifications purposes. That's the end goal of the abuse, is to shatter your willingness to resist and to break your will. And once they own you and you have been woefully convinced you can never get out, you give in. And that's what happened. I became the person who I was died, and the person they wanted me to become was what was born out of that disgusting Phoenix ashes,
Wow. How long does that process take? I mean, was this like just a few years of your childhood, or was this like a constant thing throughout your teen years, or what?
I mean, every individual is different. How long does it take to break a dog? That was the approach they took with me. You find out everybody has different talents and giftings and capabilities and capacities. And so in the beginning phase, a lot of it is you're just raising them up a little more normally. There's a lot of early trauma stuff that's hard to articulate and can be messy with memory. But as I got older, like 5 and 6 years old, man, it became very apparent that I had a desire for justice. That was like the sole deepest desire that I had, was I wanted people to know freedom, because I had been so deprived of it from day one. And there's this practice of switching mothers. You'll have a cult mother, and then they have your regular mom, and then they create this trauma bonding so that you'll bond with anybody that they want you to do. And this happens by taking you away from your mom and your dad constantly and giving you new mom and dad, new uncles, new aunts, right? And so you're living in this constant state of destabilization. And so it's as that destabilization happens and that patterning is built up, that's when a lot of the programming comes in to stabilize these new personalities and these new pursuits and endeavors. But I had this zealousness to see injustice stopped, and they preyed on that. And so they gave me opportunities to fight back against these perverts who were abusing children, and they would build up in me this rage, this need for vengeance, and then they would let me release that on somebody. And in the beginning, it was people I knew were bad guys I'd seen abuse children, because I finally felt like I could stop something that I knew was evil. And I thought this was the way to stop all these monsters in the world. I just wanted to hunt monsters in the night. I just wanted to go down in the tunnels and hunt. And that's what they kind of created in me, this just freak of a need to hunt. And then they would bury that away, and you go back to normal life, and you go back to Christian school, and you go back to the regular life, and your parents act like it's just normal, but they're like, you got to have cover stories for why your child's all beat up and bruised and your face is smashed. And like, I've had multiple reconstructive plastic surgeries from fights, like fighting for my stinking life. You got to have cover stories. So we would move around constantly. My parents would move us around sometimes every 6 months or not. But once you have a friend or a teacher or somebody notices, starts asking questions, or you start bonding with somebody that's outside the cult, they're not going to tolerate that. And so we would move all the time. And now my sisters on the other side, they weren't roped into this thing. I was in a male cult. This is the Brotherhood of the Snake down in Lake Havasu. But this is, my sisters weren't caught up in the same thing, but they were caught up by the family as a whole. And so this carried on, and we moved into this place called Show Low Pinetop, Lakeside, Arizona. And this is where an area, they would move to these specific high places where the veil is really thin. There's a very famous story about a guy who had an alien encounter out there, Snowflake, Arizona. And this is an area where I was right on the Apache reservation. White Mountain Apache Reservation was 100 yards from my door. And they would go out into the Apache reservation to these specific high places and do these rituals and this ritual magic. And a lot of that involved. That was when it was the worst to me, because I was old enough to understand how vile what was happening, in ritual magic. And at the same time, I was the most readily influenced by the family side of the equation. I thought the family and the military was the way out, but I hated this occult side of it, because I saw men become monsters physically in front of my eyes. Other things come out of people's mouths. Other things come through their eyes. Like I witnessed enough transfiguration to know that this stuff is 100% stalking in the darkness. And I don't want that to rule me forever, but it was hard to not resist. You're in it.
Well, so, all right, seeing things like that, like you say, all right, so you said you saw men become monsters. Is that metaphorically or literally?
It's literally. I've seen men do nasty things like an animal, but then I've seen men become not people.
Like literally
not be the people. Yeah.
Okay.
And there is like lycanthropy, and there's these understandings of what the watchers are capable of doing that most people are just woefully ignorant of. And that's why they're perishing, is because they lack a basic understanding of history. And one of the predominant understandings of what a watcher, specific class of celestial beings, is capable of is augmenting itself. They can shapeshift. That is by their nature. They're literally called metaschizmadzotoi in the Greek, in the New Testament. And it's because he says it's marvel not, because Hasatan you could say like transforms himself. That's a good word for it. but he shapeshifts himself into an angel of light. And his messengers, his apostles, disciples, they do the same thing. And he's like, this is because they are capable of becoming anything they want to be in order to deceive on one side of the equation. And that's what they'll do. And so when people start engaging in these necromantic rituals and other stuff, and they start to seek the embodiment of these celestial ones, they can get these things on them and in them, and they can't contain them. And some of these guys who are messing with this stuff, who don't come from the bloodline, are incapable of cohabitating like a parasite, and they feed off of each other and they can't handle it. And so that's why families are recruited from these bloodlines, and children are recruited out, even if they don't know anything about it. Like you said, the vast majority of people who come from these bloodlines, there's a lot of muddying of the waters. There's a lot of purity that's been changed. There's a lot of half-breeds. There's a lot of quarter breeds, right? There's a lot of people that don't know this stuff, and they start to get into lesser magic, and all of a sudden it's like the doors of everybody open to them. But that's why. It's because they can host these things better. Whereas those that don't, they get taken over by this stuff, and they can't change back. They can't return, in a sense. Like, people become completely possessed and are incapable of expelling the darkness after that. And who do you turn to? You're going to go to the Catholic guy who's all into the same thing that you're into, Like, most people don't understand what a real deliverance is required for somebody that has gone down this far down, where they are the consuming people.
That is absolutely insane, y'all. He ended saying that some of these people get so consumed by darkness that it is impossible for them to ever be cured, basically. That a lot of people don't understand what it really takes, or, how harsh an exorcism has to be in order to extract these demons out of these people. And his reasoning is that a lot of these people don't come from the bloodlines that are able to host these spirits, right? Now, like I said in the beginning, whether you want to believe this is true or not, this is really nothing new. I think we've talked about bloodlines, or just the YouTube community in general. This has been going on for a long time. I mean, the most simple is the fact that every president is related. And it was proven by a very young girl. How old was she? 14 or something like that? That every president is related. So we know there are specific bloodlines that are chosen by the devil and his minions to run this world, right? And a lot of these people are inhabited by these spirits, by these demons, because of their bloodline, like the 13 bloodlines that run the world, the DuPonts, Rockefeller, so on and so on, Rothschilds, the Collins family. Y'all already know. There are definitely specific bloodlines chosen for specific things. And I really like the way he explained it. And you know what it really made me think about? That's why I have this on the screen. It made me think about the show The 100. Now, I've watched the entire show maybe 2 to 3 times. It was like a couple years ago. I was just really intrigued by the show. Literally watched it maybe 3 times, all 7 seasons, I think, right? And if any of you were fans of this show called The 100, it was first a CW show, and now it's on Netflix. You'll remember they had a thing called Nightblood. And remember, the 100, they weren't born on Earth. They were sent down to Earth to see if it was inhabitable, if, humans could come back down and live there safely. So when they get down to Earth, they find out there's already people living down here. It's been okay to live, right? But they end up coming across a specific bloodline of people who were called Nightbloods. And their blood was able to host the chip to be the commander of the people. Now, the commander, the chip that you had to get implanted in the back of your neck by ritual, had to be done by a ritual. That chip could only work and, connect to the host if you had night blood. Their blood, the night bloods, their blood was very dark, black. And if that chip came in contact with a non-night-blooded person, they instantly would die. Instantly. It basically would, you'd start bleeding out your eyes and all kind of stuff, right? Because if you remember, the main character, she had to get like some kind of like fusion done in order to host it. But it didn't last long. But that's what it immediately made me think about. It's like all of these stories that you think is just, so far out there. Like, there's always a show that is exactly about what they're talking about. And literally, he's talking about, the Watchers. He's talking about fallen angels and these deities who are able to shapeshift and turn themselves into angels of light and deceive people and so on, which are a lot of the topics we talk about on this channel. He's talking about the Bloodlines who, they use to host, to do their deeds. This was the same thing that this show was basically about. And I forgot to mention the chip that goes into the neck of the Nightblood host. They now have access to all the previous commanders. So all of the people who were able to host the chip, when you become the commander, by way of ritual, you now have all of the previous commanders' thoughts, power, advice. Basically, you're all existing inside of this one chip that was created by a very smart scientist. And, she constructed this entire thing in order to survive in a world that was basically unsurvivable. It was destroyed, right? But it was a very interesting concept because that chip essentially held all of the original Nightblood spirits inside of that chip to help the future Nightbloods run the new Earth. Very interesting concept as far as that show goes. If you haven't seen it, I definitely advise y'all to go watch it. It's a pretty good show if you could, if you can get interested and get into it. What this guy's talking about, man, very interesting to listen to. Very interesting to listen to, man. He said these people are so deep into the darkness because they are actually consuming other people. He also talked about, I don't know if we got to that part yet. He talked about them drinking blood. He talked about billionaires that admitted it on a Joe Rogan podcast of using their own son's blood. I'm not sure if we got there yet, but we'll go ahead and continue the rest of the clip. I'll come back and wrap it up. All right. Check this out.
Like, that's a deep, devastating, psychological, spiritual shock, physical, your liver, like the health. This is why I'm huge into health, because I physically had to try to find ways to help people who have done all of these things. Like the consumption of human blood does horrific things to the human body, and this is a major practice within this. These families do drink blood. That's why we have these vampire class of people. It's not some kind of myth. People consume blood in order to live, extend their life force. Like, this is a normal thing. You got billionaires today who admit it on Joe Rogan podcasts and other places where they're like, yeah, I use the blood of my son and all that. Like, you don't understand. This is a religion, and this is a highly effective means of augmenting yourself. And so these watchers will give people this power. Their priest class will dispense that to people who want to go into, like what I come from down there in the Apache reservation was the people that slip between realms and become animals.
There's traversing realms involved with this. So are you saying that there are people who are traversing realms because of their ability to change into these things, or are those two separate categories? Or sometimes the same?
I would say it like this. The reason that there's these First Nation people have preserved these priest class, right? Just all across the world. This isn't just like localized to white European people. There are people here who practice this type of same old religion, and they call them skinwalkers. That's a name for them, right? But these witches and warlocks that practice these things, they go and rob graves and they take the infants' bones out and they grind them into powders, and they use that as poisons, like that. So the Jesuits was this like massive assassination team training group that was operating there that started training me. Well, then it was like you needed to learn this spiritual side of assassination and hunting and stalking. And that's where the Skinwalkers and the Navajo and the Dene are like they have a different priest class that does that. And so that's what I got put out there for, because they do stuff like slipping between realms. We call them shadow walkers in the industry. Like these are guys that have this means to go between spaces. And so where you can't hear them, you can't see them, you can't detect them. They're not on thermal, but there's certain types of ways that you can detect them. So it's like you have to get kind of raised up into these arts. And these are like, this is why we call it like, this is to me the realm of Azazel. I'm just convinced that this is all Azazel's kingdom in that realm, on that side of it. And people are just branching off of his tree of knowledge of good and evil side of it, and he's ultimately the one that was teaching men these ways of war in that sense of it. But like, just like with what happened with Nebuchadnezzar, man, they cursed him with lycanthropy. Daniel warns him, hey, don't go down that road. You got a dream from the Most High. Don't do it. And he did it anyway. He said the Watchers are going to curse you. And that's literally what they did, man. They cursed him and made him a beast. They took him down the lycanthropy road, because that's what they do, man. His hair grew out. His nails grew out. Like he became a different thing that if you and I spotted it on camera, we would say it's a cryptid. We would call these things cryptids because we don't have a proper working knowledge of history and understanding why people called these things these names. But the vampire side of the equation, they tend to be much more human masquerading, whereas you get much more feral production when people start to take this other route of becoming a beast. That's kind of the options that they give people in that world. But I believe a lot of the guys that you see out there or who are experiencing these things, they're loose assets for families. Like these are guard dogs on estates. Like that's literally, there was a training program I had to go to when I was 9 years old, and we'd go up to this farm in Michigan that was in the family, my dad's cousin, and they train all of these police, military, law enforcement, and VIP protection dogs, but then they have other cages that are man-sized cages for other stuff because that gets brought in by the families, and it's like some of these are people that are just beasts, like physically people that are like not like the rest of us, strength-wise, speed-wise, power-wise, intelligence-wise, and then others of them are just unrecognizable as anything related to man.
We all know Azazel to be one of the fallen angels that taught humans forbidden knowledge. That's what he was talking about as it relates to what he called shadow walkers, which are, I'm going to assume shape-shifting beings, these spirits who possess people and people who are able to shapeshift between realms. He said they are able to exist in spaces. Find that to be very interesting. He also brought up the Skinwalkers. Now I think I've had a good bit of you ask me to do a video about the Skinwalkers a while back, but I don't think I ever got around to it. But just to get into this real quick, I won't read too long. We'll get ready and wrap this video up. The legend of shape-shifting entity known as the Skinwalker has largely been dismissed as a hoax. After all, it is difficult to believe that a humanoid figure has been transforming into a four-legged animal and terrorizing families in the American Southwest for decades. Now, they call them shape-shifting witches of the Navajo. They say while there's no scientific proof, the Navajo Skinwalker does have deep roots in the Native American lore. As for the rest of America, it got its first real taste of the Navajo legend in 1996. A newspaper story chronicled a Utah's family traumatizing experience with a supposed creature that included cattle, mutilations and disappearances, UFO sightings, and the appearance of crop circles. But the family's most distressing encounter with the fabled Skinwalker occurred one night just 18 months after moving onto the ranch. Terry Sherman, the father of the family, was walking his dogs around the ranch late at night when he encountered a wolf, but this was no ordinary wolf. It was perhaps 3 times bigger than a normal one, had glowing red eyes, and stood unfazed by 3 close-range shots Sherman blasted into its hide. The Sherman family weren't the only ones to be traumatized on the property. After they moved out, several new owners experienced eerily similar encounters with these creatures, and today, the ranch has become a hub of paranormal research that's aptly renamed Skinwalker Ranch. Now it goes on to say some traditions concerning Native American monsters believe that skinwalkers are born of a benevolent medicine man who abuses indigenous magic for evil. The medicine man is then given mythical powers of evil that vary from tradition to tradition. But the power all traditions mention is the ability to turn into or possess an animal or person. Other traditions believe a man, woman, or a child can become a skinwalker should they commit any kind of deep-seated taboo. Now, here's where it gets a little bit interesting. Remember, he talked about these people digging up children and grinding and turning their bones into dust and using it for poison. Now check this out. It says in Native American lore, the skinwalkers are described as being mostly animalistic physically, even when they are in human form. They are reportedly near impossible to kill except with a bullet or a knife dipped in white ash. Now they don't say what this white ash is, but I'm gonna assume that this is the bones he was talking about that they dig up in those areas and they use them as a poison. Now, I'm not sure if this is specifically from little ones, but man, that's kind of crazy. The article says it. They're reportedly nearly impossible to kill unless it's with a bullet or a knife dipped in white ash. So the bullet and the knife has to be dipped in this white ash. We're going to go ahead and safely assume it's those bones. Now that I find to be very interesting right there, y'all. The podcast, we only covered, what was that? Maybe 14 minutes of it. We got a lot of information out of 14 minutes. I think the podcast is almost 2 hours. And he talked about a lot. He talked about a lot. We could have really, made this video a long one, but y'all already know, man. I wanted to get on here and share some of that with y'all. Maybe in the next couple of days we could circle back around and talk about some more because I really like the way he explained some of these things, and I was able to, dig up the receipts for a lot of the stuff he talked about. So maybe we'll jump on a part 2 with this one. I know y'all want me to bring that bootleg part 2, so I'm going to get going on that as well. Y'all probably see that video this weekend. So, yeah, man, with that being said, y'all let me know what y'all think about this down in the comments, man. As always, I appreciate y'all. It's Black Balloon, and I'm going to see y'all soon. I'm out.